Marysville has come up with, there's a proposal of what I think is a really common sense way to deal with this issue, a really common sense ordinance. And essentially, it would institute mandatory minimum sentences for what they're calling public disorder crimes. Specifically, this would be targeted at people who are repeat offenders, who are always out there doing the same things, creating a public nuisance time and time again. And the more times they're arrested, convicted of doing these things, the more time they would have to spend in jail. So let's take a look at the ordinance as proposed. It defines public disorder crime as theft in the third degree, vehicle prowling, criminal trespass, use of a controlled substance in a public place. So if you are convicted of, or you have a case where, basically it can be resolved in various ways, but where it ended with you having to admit guilt. If you're convicted of 2+ crimes, then you have to, within 5 years, all this is within a 5-year period, then you have to spend 30 days in jail. That's a minimum. If you're convicted of 4 or more public nuisance crimes in the 5-year period, 60 days in jail. If you're convicted of 6+ public nuisance crimes in a 5-year period, then you have to spend 90 days in jail. And honestly, that's not even very much. If you've committed 6 public disorder crimes, so that's 6 vehicle prowls in 5 years, you got to spend 90 days in jail. That seems really reasonable to me. And it also is an opportunity for a reset. And why are you prowling through vehicles? Probably a drug addict. You're probably looking for something that you can sell to buy drugs, because you're not going to get a lot out of a vehicle prowl, right? You might get a couple hits of something. So that's typically who's committing those crimes. So it gives you those 90 days, hey, we keep arresting you for this. You keep trying to, get you help, which I think is always the key, get you help for the underlying issue. But if you're doing this 6 times, you're caught 6 times, which means God knows how many times you've actually done it, that you weren't caught. If you're caught 6 times, you're convicted, then you're going to jail for 90 days. And we're going to get you off the street, and we're going to give our community a little respite from your criminal activity, from your public nuisance. And I'm thinking, of course, there's going to be some ridiculous pushback to this. What is it going to be? Because we can't, even repeat offenders, we can't, God forbid that you arrest people who are consistently victimizing law-abiding community members. Well, of course, it is the campaign policy program director for the ACLU of Washington. The Everett Herald quoted her in its article on this saying, incarceration itself is incredibly disruptive to people's lives, said Jasmine Clark, the Smart Justice Campaign Policy Program Director for ACLU Washington. You're talking about a potential loss of employment, loss of housing, loss of custody of their children, loss of any type of government resources. She went on to say that locking people up doesn't address the underlying issues like addiction or poverty. She said, we cannot punish people into recovery. And then she notes that laws against public drug use disproportionately impact the homeless, given people with homes have the option of using drugs privately. So when she says in there that, talks about, and again, I want you to really focus on the way that individuals who are opposed to any level of incarceration speak about this issue. She's talking about incarceration itself is incredibly disruptive to people's lives. You know what else is disruptive to people's lives? Being the victim of a crime, having stuff you worked hard for stolen from you, feeling unsafe in your community, having to spend money to increase home security, having to change what you do in your day-to-day life because you're worried about criminal behavior. That's disruptive to someone's life. Why don't you care about those disruptions to people's lives? And then she went on to say, you're talking about a potential loss of employment, loss of housing, loss of custody of their children, loss of any type of government resources. Again, what about the losses suffered by law-abiding individuals who are working hard, trying to raise a family, trying to make ends meet? What about the losses that they suffer as a result of repeat criminal acts? Be it theft, be it property damage, be it assault. We have to change this mindset of consistently prioritizing people who are breaking the law over people who are following the law. And I don't know what it is going to take to make that switch for some of these individuals, if it's going to take them being personally victimized by crime to make that switch. But when I think about the American Civil Liberties Union, wanting all Americans, what it's supposed to be at its core, to be able to live free and to not fear that they're going to be discriminated against. And I just think, why aren't you also standing up for individuals who are at the receiving end of some of this criminal behavior? What about their right to feel like, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? And we forget about them way too often. And it's a narrative that really has to change. So I like this law out of Marysville. I think it's a good proposed ordinance. If you're committing 6 crimes, and to think that you wouldn't want somebody who commits 6 of these crimes to spend time in jail is insane to me. So unfortunately, we're going to have to stop listening to people like the ACLU if we hope to dig ourselves out of this crime crisis. Coming up next, I want to talk about the watered-down version of the drug ordinance that the city of Seattle is going to vote on at 2 p.m. and why it is setting Seattle police officers up to fail. It is setting Seattle police officers up for increased scrutiny, increased criticism, probably unfairly, and increased accusations that they're just a bunch of racist pigs, because I just picture that happening.